Welcome to each one of you. We usually see half our class trickle in after we start. We've got an interesting topic today. We don't learn too much about it in med school, but I think if it affects our health, it's something that we should understand more about. So, we were talking last time I was here about learning Psalms 91. And I've had my 5-year-old actually put it to memory, because it's something that even a 5-year-old can learn. They may not understand all the details, but they can recall those verses of encouragement. When they're feeling down and alone, we can all benefit. This week, I was listening on the audio verse. This was actually an excerpt from Time, a more recent Time magazine article. They were talking about what is the latest research shows for happiness. Now, part of this class is to promote health. And ultimately, if you're in good health, that means you're happy. I would assume people correlate the two. Who wants to be a miserable, healthy person? It just doesn't ring with me. So happiness is one of the ultimate goals of overall healthy person. So I thought this is something important to me. I should pay attention if I want to. Good morning. And so they were talking about the research that supports what makes people happy. And so a simple thing that actually a lot of the points that were made were things that unconsciously I've kind of become aware of. But sometimes it's better if you have somebody just spell it out for you, so you're very conscious of the things that you've kind of figured out. Common sense, maybe you would call it. But it's not a surprise that one of the keys to people who are happy versus those who are chronically miserable is happy people tend to list or count their blessings. Now you might do that by making a list up, writing it down. Or you might just mentally do this throughout the day, where you just find things that make, that you, say you see your kids playing well together. And you say, I'm so glad that in your mind that I have some healthy kids getting along. There's millions of things in the day that could come into this list. Whether you write it out with a pen or whether you just recount it and rehearse it in your mind. This is one of the keys they've identified that happy people end up doing. They recount their blessings. You might sit down if you're particularly miserable one day and just make see how long your list can be. Go back as far in time as you need to just think of something that clearly is a blessing, that all you have to do is find people who you think are not as privileged as you. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I have a house that doesn't leak my roof. You know, my neighbor has a leak in his roof. I feel blessed that this roof works. I'm happy this year that my garden is producing lots of grapes. You know, all I did was put fertilizer and water on it. So simple, by listing this list of blessings, not only do we feel happier, our physiology inside is changing. Our stress levels are improving. And this is part of good health. It's not just placebo effect. It really changes our internal chemistry. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, and people get brought out of deep depression by doing that, but not just, I mean, writing it down, saying it out loud every single day, saying it out loud and writing it helps reinforce it to your mind better sometimes than just thinking it.
I would encourage you, if you're feeling extra down, is when you need to actually go through the process, forcing yourself to write down these blessings. And if you only come up with 3, well, just spend a little more time. Sometimes you just have to think of people who have had some bad luck. And all of a sudden you find blessings in your life where you have been protected from that bad luck. Go ahead.
I remember somebody explained to me about if you want to learn something, it's kind of like taking a pencil and you write on a piece of paper real light and then you go back over it and you make it a little darker, and then again, and finally to a point it's so dark that it kind of ingrains it into your mind, as you were saying. So kind of that's what we're doing. We're putting it, programming ourselves.
Right. And this repetition, you think, well, I already know those things. But there's something about writing it out. It makes it very conscious in your mind. And then that positive voice is kind of drowning out the negative voices we listen to when we're feeling depressed. So you can read it. But in Psalms 92, it kind of does exactly what we're illustrating here. David, when he wrote this psalm, he was putting into practice what we've just discussed, making a list, repeating it out loud, even putting it into a song or a song. And so it says, Lord, it is good to praise you, Most High God. It is good to make music to honor you. It is good to sing every morning about your love. It is good to sing every night about how faithful you are. And then at the bottom says, Lord, you make me glad by what you have done. So this act of praising is not just something that makes us feel good. It's been put it's put before us as a method to give joy and gladness to us. And I find if we are simply healthy creatures, that doesn't mean we're happy creatures. And this is part of that road to happiness. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, it's a privilege to realize you have ordained ways that bring us great joy. May we not forget them in times when we feel sad news in our life, when we feel bad health and we feel there's just misery. May we realize that in spite of all this, we can find joy by recounting all the blessings that you have provided. And may we do this daily and live with the happiness that you have ordained. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So there is a handout on the back counter if you don't have one. And last two weeks ago we talked, actually before we get into the main topic, someone posed a question on a health topic. It says, what does the body need to produce better or use better the enzyme lipase? Lipase is an enzyme that everybody has. It's part of good health. Without lipase, we would die after a meal at Thanksgiving time. You'd think, what do you need lipase for? It mobilizes fatty acids. And so fatty acids, if they are sitting in our fat cells, they aren't doing us any good. So lipase is needed at times. We want fat cells to store the fat, and we want it to be released at the right time. In this country, we focus more about the releasing part because it doesn't seem to be working that well for many people, because we have an abundance of calories in our, and not enough activities to sometimes distract us. So, a very simple nutshell, what makes lipase more efficient is how much insulin is in our diet. Because the enzyme lipase is sensitive to the insulin in our body. And we already have studied or heard of what is it that raises or lowers our insulin levels. That's exactly what will make lipase more or less efficient. If there are two enzymes or two chemicals that tell lipase whether lipase should store the fat or release the fat. And without lipase doing its magic, it's going to be stored when it should be released. And so that's a problem that diabetics have, because their insulin levels are very high. It might be 3, 4, 5, 10 times higher than a normal person for their insulin levels. So how is lipase going to work in that setting? It's going to be a challenge for a diabetic to lose weight if they're taking insulin like their doctor has prescribed, because the enzyme lipase won't release the fat. So how can you burn the fat if insulin is telling fat to be stored. That's the message insulin gives your body, that there's an abundance of calories, blood sugar is too high, store the fat. Turn the blood sugar into fat. And that's what your body does. And instead, we want the reverse. If you have diabetes, it's because we want to lose some of the fat cells. Well, so we have to attack it through this whole, what's that phrase? Whole body response.
Total body response.
Yes.
Sir.
And the whole body response means that we just don't take less insulin. That's not the cure for a diabetic. That's going to make them sick. We need to find out ways to reduce the need to require a person to take those high insulin levels. Everyone has insulin levels, so what's going to lower your insulin levels, or when will it be the lowest? When you first wake up in the morning, you're going to have low insulin levels if you don't have diabetes. Before a meal, you're going to have low insulin levels. After a meal, it's going to be quite high. So if you want to burn fat, exercise, go for a walk before you eat. It doesn't have to be a marathon, but that's when you're more likely to burn the fat cells. It's because insulin levels are low. We also promote exercise after a meal because it uses up some of the calories that would spike your insulin to go high. You'll be less successful at after a meal at burning the fat that's already stored, but you'll be successful at keeping those fat cells from storing calories from the meal. Instead, you'll burn them. So it is good to exercise. That's the other equation. Epinephrine is the other hormone that controls lipase. So it's insulin and lipase. Exercise will raise your epinephrine levels. It's a stress hormone, so it helps us with the stress of exercise. And so you can think of epinephrine as the opposite message of insulin. Epinephrine says it's time to release the fat, and insulin says it's time to store the fat. So during exercise, your insulin levels will go down, your epinephrine levels go up, and it's the ratio that controls when lipase sends out the fat from the fat cells and releases it, and for your body to burn it. Things like your heart burn fat. So that in a nutshell can tell you when is it more effective to take a walk to burn a few fat calories. Before breakfast. That's when your insulin levels are the lowest. Of course, if you haven't been eating, you don't want to do this exercise really quickly, like a sprint. You want to do it like a brisk walk. But if you were trying to sprint, you're not helping yourself. Burning fat doesn't work in the setting of a sprint. All you're doing there is burning sugar that was made by protein, which came from your muscles. So no sprinting before breakfast. Just a steady walk. All right, I hope that kind of illustrates the need for exercise. And if you can't exercise in the abundance you'd like because maybe your knees are bothering you, your back's bothering you, then go for focusing on ways to blunt the insulin response, which is by eating foods that are going to undo the effects of diabetes. Foods that are whole, unprocessed, aren't sent through a factory before they get to you to eat. Those are the kind of foods that are low in fat, especially the fat that you pour out of a bottle, because that's what causes diabetes, is the oil in our diet.
It's so commonly thought that diabetes is caused by carbohydrate intake, and nobody hardly mentions that it's really caused by too much fat intake. You just mentioned it, but has anybody ever heard that? It's really fat. It's the fat that's the problem.
It's a good message, and we often forget that. Thank you for reminding us.
It's not very well known.
So that's another way to lower our insulin levels and have more success at burning the fat, is just to avoid things that will spike our insulin. So eating the foods that are less refined will do that. So every time we reach for something that's processed, like a bag of chips, it has two bad things going for it. One, it's processed, so it'll raise our blood sugar that way. And two, chips always come with fat in them. And so both of those things end up making it harder for us to make lipase do what we want it to and burn the fat. Now there is a good amount of fat everyone needs. You'll notice these marathon runners sometimes just keel over with a heart attack. They had too little fat in their body. So if you have under 8% body fat, you're more likely to have that extreme. Most of us are not in that category. Because we're talking about these people that look like walking skeletons. These Ethiopian marathon runners, they're very lean. And if for some reason being that lean is also unhealthy for our heart, it leads to arrhythmias. I don't think I'm ever going to get to that point, but I'm just saying there's a good reason why we need a little bit of fat, healthy fat. All right. So we're looking at the topic of arsenic. And let me pull that up. So last time we were touching on what's wrong with arsenic. Why is arsenic bad? And the article was titled, "The Effects of Too Much Arsenic in Our Diet." And I think most of you realize that these topics are coming from the website nutritionfacts.org. So if you want to review them, that's where you'll find these articles. And this is a transcript of his video. So arsenic has some similarities chemically to phosphorus. So that's why plants have an easy time picking up arsenic out of the soil. So you really don't want to have arsenic in your garden, because it'll end up in your vegetables and then it goes up into our body. So you can get poisoned with arsenic in one dose, like we find it's in pesticides. They used to use it for all sorts of ways to kill small animals, because arsenic is toxic and you don't need a lot of it. Just enough, the weight of a tenth of a paper clip. A paper clip is like 1 gram, not very heavy. So a tenth is 100 milligrams. That's not a very big dose. You could probably easily put that on your fingernail. But that's enough to kill a person. And it would only take an hour to have its effect. So we don't need a lot of arsenic for it to have some bad side effect in us. And this hasn't always gotten a lot of attention, because we think that our food shouldn't have arsenic, and who would be so crazy to put arsenic on their food? We don't sprinkle it on our food. It's not in the ingredient list. When you read the ingredients, they don't say there's arsenic in your food, but yet it's in our diet, and our goal is to find out, can we do something about it? Arsenic, last time we learned, was an immunotoxicant. Just from that word you realize toxic and the immune system. We don't want anything that makes our immune system weaker. And so arsenic is doing that. It also has been linked to causing cancers. And so that's another reason we would rather be good to avoid the foods that have arsenic in them. All right. So if you're growing, let's say, a crop in land that has been contaminated with arsenic, well then you'd want to find something on the store shelf that came from a different part of the country where there wasn't arsenic. Because arsenic isn't just universally everywhere in our soil. It has been concentrated in certain places. And in this country, arsenic is used industrially. So it's not something that we will ever avoid. We just don't want those toxic wastes in our food supply. So we're using it as pesticide to kill bugs, sort of like DDT was used a long time ago before we learned some of its toxic side effects. So most people have figured out that the toxins like mercury, where do they come from? In our food supply. Yeah. predominantly. If you want to know how much mercury someone's exposed to, just ask how many fish they eat a week. And that's a good predictor of how much mercury will be in their body. Well, the same with arsenic. If you ask somebody if they eat certain foods, you'll be able to measure or predict that they're going to have higher arsenic levels. Okay. Now, fortunately, arsenic doesn't get magnified. Biomagnification, we learned is a term where certain chemicals, a few weeks back we talked about certain chemicals that can build up in fat of the small animals that were exposed to it. And then the bigger animals that eat those animals, that's called biomagnification. It happens in the oceans where small fish eat big fish and the fish get eaten by bigger fish, and each fish is concentrating those toxins. Unfortunately, arsenic is not getting biomagnified, which is a good thing. But the bad thing is it doesn't take much of an exposure to actually make you sick. So they have done some tests. In the second paragraph it talks about cancer benchmark levels were exceeded by all children for the testing for arsenic exposure for. So let's hear his video, and then we can stop it when he comes to some chart that seems a little more detailed.
Dietary practices influence our exposure to pesticides, toxic heavy metals, and industrial pollutants. A diet high in fish and other animal products, for example, results in greater exposure to these pollutants than does a more plant-based diet because these compounds may accumulate up the food chain. Researchers at UC Davis analyzed the diets of children and adults in California to see just how bad things have gotten. Cancer benchmark levels were exceeded by all children. 100% of children tested for arsenic, the banned pesticides dieldrin and DDT, metabolite DDE, as well as dioxins, and not just by a little. More than 100 times the acceptable daily exposure for arsenic in preschoolers, school-aged children, parents, and older adults, about 10 times the acceptable levels for these various pesticides, and up to 1,000 times the daily dose for dioxins. Where are all these toxins coming from? The number one source of dioxins in the diets of Californian preschoolers, kids, parents, and grandparents appears to be dairy, followed by meat, then white potatoes, refined grains, mushrooms, poultry, fish. Our DDT legacy these days is also mostly from dairy. Dieldrin was created as a safer alternative to DDT, but was banned 2 years later, in 1974, though still found in our bodies, mostly thanks to dairy, meat, and evidently cucumbers. Chlordane made it into the 80s before being banned, though we're still exposed through dairy and cukes. Lead is also food-wise, mostly from dairy, and mercury, not surprisingly, mostly from tuna and other seafood. But arsenic was surprising, mostly from chicken in children. Wow.
All right. So there you have it. These are all very bad chemicals for our health. If you look on the list, they have 4 columns here. The first column is preschool. The second column, school-aged children. The third column is parents of young children, and then older adults. So it kind of summarizes all of us here.
Are they still using those chemicals on cucumbers?
I hope not. But that's one reason I like to grow my cucumbers, because I like to eat the skin.
Yeah.
If you only eat organic cucumbers and spinach and those other vegetables, then you would be safe, right? If you only get organic.
That's why people buy organic.
Unless it's a drift coming from a neighboring,
Right.
farm or something. But yeah, that's why I always get organic everything, because otherwise you're getting everything sprayed with all this stuff.
That's exactly
And
right.
it's affecting your health. And
Yeah.
But we've also heard that a vegetable is more, there's the benefits outweigh the risks, even if you can't afford to buy organic, which is a good point for.
Well, yeah, some people will avoid vegetables altogether or in small quantities because they have this great fear of all these chemicals on the food. And so if you're not eating your vegetables, what are you giving your body in terms of antioxidants to boost your liver to help break down these toxins that are in our diet? So we haven't given our liver much to work with if we're avoiding all the vegetables because the prices of the organic we consider is too high for our budget. So it's kind of the lesser of two evils. I think it's good to buy organic. The foods that are organic of most significance, like if you're eating a banana skin, then what's on the surface of the banana skin is really important to your health. If you're peeling the banana skin, most of the toxins are now not going to be in the food you're eating. So even though bananas are heavily sprayed with pesticides wherever they grow, it's really hard on the workers there. You can get rid of that by the skin. So all the foods that you can peel probably don't need, it's not as crucial if you buy them organic because you're able to get rid of a lot of the organics. Now, if you have a budget that can afford it, I'm not saying don't buy those foods, but if you're going to choose which organic foods are more crucial, is the foods that are, you don't skin. Strawberries, you don't skin. Okay, so strawberries are going to be big offenders because unless you're buying them organic, you're going to have some of that residue on the strawberry because there's no way we're going to eat our strawberry carefully peeling each one. And now blueberries. When I buy my blueberries at Costco, or my friends brought them from this farmer up there in Oregon, they're saying that the blueberries only sprayed before the fruit erupts. In other words, just before they flower. So then the fruit is not being exposed to that chemical. It's sure they're not organic. They can't get the organic label because they use these pesticides. But it doesn't end up on the skin of your blueberry because the blueberry wasn't made when they sprayed it. So there's, even though you should buy organic if you can, I guess, put some of your fears to rest by knowing how much toxin is on that food. And so rather than say, okay, I have to buy organic and my blueberries, so I can't buy any blueberries because there's no organic blueberries here, just the regular kind, so you don't buy any blueberries because they're not organic. I'm trying to share this, that as you understand some of the details, you realize, well, the exposure for this one is acceptable to me. So I'm willing to buy blueberries that are not organic because I don't think the exposure is significant for the extra money that I'm spending.
I buy the frozen blueberries at Costco, and it says organic.
And that's a good way to get them. Often frozen fruit is more affordable because the costs and the losses to the farmer are less. So they charge more for fresh for that reason. So that's a good way to get organic is frozen.
I used to get the organic ones at Costco, and then I read that the wild blueberries are more nutritious than even the organically grown ones. And so I get at Trader Joe's these frozen wild blueberries. And I'm trusting that they're not sprayed because they're wild. You
I
think
would
that's
think
a good assumption?
I think so, because wild means you have not planted them in a field.
Yeah, they're just growing now.
You can't call them wild once you put them in your field.
So if you peel the cucumber, you'll still get some nutrients, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but a lot of the nutrients are under the skin for a lot of the foods that we eat, like apples,
Yeah.
cucumbers.
Well, I guess maybe washing it probably would help the outside, washing it really well.
So if what they sprayed was water soluble, some of it will come off, so it's worth trying that, yes. I wash my watermelon for that reason, with soap. There was somebody actually died a few years back from watermelon exposure. They had, for some reason, an extra amount of toxin. I don't know, was the pesticide extra concentrated? Anyway, it was left on the peel. And I guess they didn't wash it off the peel, and it got enough of a dose just by handling the peel. Not that they ate the peel, but just by handling. So